Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Did you know that the voice telling you to binge might not be you at all, but a mental habit you can learn to talk back to? Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Glenn Livingston. Dr. Livingston is a psychologist with a PhD from Yeshiva University who has spent his career treating binge eating disorders, overeating, and food-related addictive patterns. He is the former CEO of a consulting firm serving Fortune 500 food industry clients, and his work has been featured in major media outlets, including the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Sun-Times, and national television. Dr. Livingston has previously worked with food companies on the promotion of highly palatable products and has spoken openly about his own history of compulsive overeating and weight gain. Disappointed by conventional psychological approaches to deal with his struggles, he conducted a large self-funded study of more than 40,000 participants and used these findings to integrate into his clinical work. He wrote a best-selling book, Never Binge Again, which outlines a structured food plan and uses categories such as nevers, always, unrestricted, and conditionals, and teaches people to separate from what he calls the inner voice that drives people to binge. Dr. Livingston also runs a program called Defeat Your Cravings, which provides coaching and trains coaches internationally. And he also hosts his own podcast, which is focused on binge eating and food addiction recovery. So welcome, Glenn.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week. I just wanted to mention that the latest book is also called Defeat Your Cravings. The Never Binge Again book is the very old book.
Thank you. So let's start with, you once worked for food companies to promote highly palatable food. So you were on that side. What made you switch over to from what was presumably quite profitable work to your current focus on health and also focusing on food compulsions?
I was definitely on the wrong side of the war. And I guess I recognize, excuse me, that they were engineering these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and fat, and salt, and excitotoxins. And it was all designed to hit the bliss point in the reptilian brain without giving you the nutrition to feel satisfied. And I had a really serious food problem myself. I was almost 300 pounds at one point. And I don't know why it took me so long to see this, but I was digging for all of the psychological reasons that I might be overeating. I come from a family of 17 psychotherapists, so it's not a wonder that I did that. The joke is that if anything breaks in the house, we all rush over it, ask it how it feels, and nobody can fix it. But the psychological approach really wasn't working for me. And I started to see just how powerful these foods were. And this was 30 years ago. See just how powerful these foods were in some of the tricks that they were using to press those evolutionary buttons that make us feel like we can't resist, that we don't know when we're hungry or when we're full. And it seemed like a big part of the solution might be for me to get away from that. Also had some other life events that led me to want to do something more meaningful and purposeful and not necessarily chase the Benjamins all the time. So yeah, all of that, all of that.
But what was your aha moment that made you realize that I had to do something that was not psychological, but was more about changing my food? Was there a particular moment?
And so what I actually did was you could argue that it was psychological, but it wasn't depth psychological. It wasn't about the problems I had with my mom when I was little or guilt that I felt with my sister or something. Okay. So I had engineered this study. I was getting a lot of money to do these studies from these big companies. And I said, why don't I do one for myself? And so I was trying to figure out what's the relationship between overeating and stress, overeating and guilt, overeating and loneliness, depression, anxiety, anger. And over the course of several years, when the internet clicks were very cheap, I had 40,000 people take a survey. And basically, I asked them, what did they have trouble overeating once they started eating it? And what were they struggling with in their lives? And just on a very broad level, I could tell that people who struggle with loneliness or depression or feeling brokenhearted, they gravitated towards chocolate. It wasn't massive correlations or any earth-shattering findings, but they did. They gravitated towards chocolate. That described me. People who people who overeat on salty, crunchy things, they tended to be more stressed at work. And people who gravitated towards starchy, chewy, bread-like things like pizza, pasta, bagels, they tended to be more stressed at home. And
That's interesting.
it really is interesting,
Yeah.
but it actually led me nowhere. So before, I thought it was fascinating. I thought this was going to be the solution for overeating for all times. And before I started getting up and talking about it, I thought, well, I have to solve my own overeating problem. And I called my mom, who's also a therapist, and I said, Mom, what happened to me in my youth that would make me go to chocolate when I feel depressed or alone or brokenhearted? I know I'm in a not so great marriage and I'm not so happy, and it makes sense that I'm struggling like this, but why? How did the pattern get started? And Mom gets this awful look on her face. She's just, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. And I said, Mom, it's okay. We're talking about 1965. This is 40 years, just 20 years ago when I talked to her. So it was 40 years ago when she's
Okay.
talking about. I said, I forgive you. I love you. I just want to know what happened. And she said, in 1965, when you were 1 year old and you needed hugs and love and all the things that a toddler needs, I was in a horrible place because your grandfather and my dad had just gotten out of prison and I didn't know where he was, and I was horribly depressed about that. At the same time, Vietnam was raging. Your father was a captain in the army. We were trying to get pregnant with your sister, and I thought I'm going to be an army widow with two small kids. And so half the time when you would come running over to play with me or for hugs or love, I didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So I just was staring at the wall and feeling depressed and anxious. So what I did was I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup
Huh?
in a refrigerator on the floor. And I'd say, honey, go get your Bosco. And you'd go crawling over to the refrigerator and you'd get the bottle and you'd suck on it and you go into a chocolate sugar coma. And if this was a movie, if this was the drama, if the trauma that happened to you in your childhood was really responsible for your overeating problems, then at that moment, Mom and I would have a big hug and a big cry, and I would never struggle with chocolate again. And that's not really what happened. It was a good conversation to have. It was over Skype, so we couldn't hug. But I learned a lot more about her. I learned about what she was struggling with. It made me hate myself less. But I actually wound up eating chocolate more. I wound up with a bigger problem. And it's because there was this crazy voice of justification in my head that went something like, hey, Glenn, you know what? Our mama didn't love us enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life and stop being so lonely and depressed, you're going to have to eat all the chocolate in the world. Yippee, let's go get more. Right. And I said, okay, this is crazy. And then I remembered graduate school neurology. And I'm a psychologist, not a medical doctor, but we still had classes. And I remembered that you could think of the brain in three parts. You could think of the reptilian brain responsible for survival, feast and famine, fight or flight, eat, mate, or kill. Then there's the mammalian brain that says before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your tribe and the people that you love in your community? And then there's a neocortex on top of that says before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact does that have on your long-term goals? Like weight loss, but also like spirituality and art and music and everything. And I knew from some of the studies that I'd seen working with the food industry that they were targeting the reptilian brain. They're trying to get the bliss point there. They're trying to get the eat more at all costs point in the reptilian brain. Yet every approach that I ever took to overcoming overeating had to do with loving myself more. I saw all the best psychologists and psychiatrists. I went through the 12 steps in Overeaters Anonymous, which I got a lot out of in a lot of other ways. But everything I ever did, it was all about my personality, my character, and trying to feel like I love myself more inside, to fill that hole in my heart so I wouldn't keep filling the hole in my stomach. But what's going on? Because the food companies are targeting the reptilian brain. So there was this factor that I was not paying attention to. And actually, in some ways, I know now that if you are craving chocolate that's off of your food plan and something you really don't want to be doing for some reason, then that really has to do with the reptilian brain wanting more, feeling a need for survival. And so if you open up and you kind of say, "Oh, poor me, I have this loneliness inside, I have this depression inside, I need comfort, I need to escape, I need to numb out with food," you're actually giving yourself permission to let go of the controls that evolution has provided you with, or God provided with if you don't believe in evolution. It's just the way the brain is. And so I said, okay, I need to switch gears here. I've learned an awful lot of myself these last 20 years, and it's been a worthwhile journey, but I'm still fat and I'm still eating all this stuff. And I still feel like I can't control myself. And I've tried every which way to Sunday to fix it. I need to switch gears and say, I got to take control of this reptilian brain. In order to do that, I have to know when it's awake. I have to know when it's about to do something. So I decided to make a very rules-based system. This was very private. I was not planning to go out and talk to anybody about that. And so I make this, my first rule was something like, I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again, only 2 ounces on Saturdays after my workout. And that way, if I heard a little voice in my head on Wednesday and I'm at the coffee counter and there's a big hairy chocolate bar on the counter that's calling my name, and I hear this voice that says, "You know what, Glenn? You worked out hard enough. I know it's a Wednesday, but you can start your silly rules again tomorrow. It'll be just as easy. You want to have ahead and have a little bit. It's not going to do any harm." I would say, wait a minute, that's not me. Now, I actually call that inner voice something a little bit harsh, and I wish I used another word. I wish I just called it the food monster, because I had no idea that I was going to be famous for this. I had no idea that people were going to walk up to me in a bookstore and point at me and say some of the things that they say now. But I called it my inner pig. So they point at me and they go, "Aren't you the pig guy?" I called it my inner pig. And I would say, chocolate on a weekday is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as crude and ridiculous as that sounds, it would wake me up at the moment of impulse. And it's really the first thing that did, and let me separate from that destructive inner voice and let me say, wait a minute, that's not me. That's my pig. Chocolate is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And I slowly had these extra microseconds before I would indulge. And initially, sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't. I did a little better. I lost a little weight, but it wasn't a miracle right away. What was a miracle was that I no longer felt confused. It seemed to me like this was the right model. Yeah, there is this lower part of my brain. It does generate these urges, which then I seem to assign words to. And I think I can control this with words. I think I can figure it out. So the first thing that I did, and this is how I personally recovered over the next 8 years, it doesn't take 8 years any longer, but how I recovered was for the next 8 years, I kept a journal. And whenever my pig said something, I would try to write down at the moment exactly what it was saying. But even if I made a mistake, I would write down, how did it convince me to do that afterwards? And I was very determined. And then I would say, how was it wrong? So let's say the pig says, it'll be just as easy to start your silly diet again tomorrow. The truth is, the way the brain works, that's not true. The principle of neuroplasticity says that what fires together wires together. So if I have a craving for chocolate and I say, I'll just start again tomorrow, and then I eat the chocolate, I've reinforced the craving and I've reinforced the thought. So I'm more likely to say, start tomorrow, tomorrow, and I'm more likely to have a stronger craving for chocolate tomorrow. So therefore, I can only ever use the present moment to be healthy. If you're in a hole, you better stop digging. And it was those types of rational refutations, like fixing my thinking, and the programs they would call it thinking. It was fixing my thinking that took away my excuses. most of the time for me, that worked. Most of the time, I'm kind of like a good Jewish boy from New York, and I feel very guilty if I don't follow what I said I was going to do. And so if I took away my rationale, my reason for cheating, it was very hard for me to cheat. I would feel too guilty. And so very slowly, I started to get all the sugar and flour out of my system, and I could think a little more clearly. I didn't have sugar, flour, alcohol, excitotoxins, all the chemicals and the big food stuff. They create cravings for themselves. And so you have the craving because you're eating the thing, and then you're eating the thing because you have the craving, and it's a cycle that. So as I was able to pull myself apart from my pig, I could slow down and change the excuses, and my physiology changed, and very slowly I was able to get better. Took 8 years. My pig had a lot of excuses, and I kind of thought that was the end of it. I was just happy that I was a relatively thin person myself. I lost about 80 pounds and I have around 220, 225 since then. Periods when I'm a little thinner, but I can't seem to maintain it a lot thinner. And I'm going about my business. I was running a coach training organization. I had some clients. I was not really writing books or anything, but I was a minor part of a publishing company. And then I get divorced. And it was surprising and shocking. And I realized I was going to have to do something else because we're running the business together. I said, I want to do something meaningful. And I call up my CEO in the publishing company that I was a part of, minor part. And I said, I need to do something different. I was thinking about writing a book. He says, that would be great because if you wrote a book, then you would do all the things that authors need to do to really promote it. And we can't get these authors to do it, so we can't really prove how good we are. Why don't you write a book? We'll make it a bestseller. And so I take my journal, I I put it into a book over the course of about 3, 4 months. This is while I'm getting divorced. And I send it to the CEO. He calls me back 3 weeks later. He says, Glenn, this is great. I've got a pig inside me too. I don't need donuts. Donuts are pig slop. I don't like farm animals tell me what to do. I don't need pig slop. He proceeds to lose 90 pounds over the course of the next year or so. We published the book along the way, and we were both pretty good at marketing given our backgrounds, but it was a good book. It was, I think in some ways, my frustration and anger during the divorce helped because I wrote it as a very angry allegory, me versus the pig. And I'm not nearly that angry anymore. I've really softened a lot, but the energy in it took off. And I wound up with almost 2 million readers. It's insane. I had no idea it would take off. And we did the right things, but I had no idea it would take off like that. Okay, may I finish this part of the story and then
Yeah.
really understand?
Yep, go
So
ahead.
then I'm getting way too many requests for coaching and I can't handle them all myself. So I start a little agency and coaching people all over the world how to do this over the next 8 years from then. So this is from 2017 really to 2023. I guess that's 6 years, 6, 7 years. We see almost 2,000 clients. And we develop the process of fixing your thinking into a real method. We got really good at it. You improve what you measure. So we would ask people their overeating frequency beforehand, their overeating frequency at the 1 month, 6 month points. And we find within 1 month that everybody who engaged with their coach, and some people buy programs and they don't engage and can't do anything about that, but the people who engage with their coach, which was the majority of people, they have an 89.4% reduction in overeating in the first month. I think, okay, great. So we really got it down to a science. It's not 8 years, it's about a month for people to start getting it. But then we do our first set of follow-ups around 6 months and it drops back down to around 55, 57%, something like that. And that really bothers me and I can't really understand it because this was the bane of my existence. And if you've ever really been addicted with food and gone through 7 different drive-throughs to be sure nobody knows what you're eating or eating food out of the garbage or woken up hating yourself, you know what it's like. And I just can't imagine why people would want to go back to that. And I start doing research into what's going. So in 2023, I start researching what's going on with that. I come to the conclusion that these people tell me, Doc, you took away all my excuses. I don't have any good reason left to binge. I can't give you a rational reason why I should. However, sometimes you just wanna. And I would say, screw it, just do it. And so I say, okay, now what's causing that? Why do you get this? And it's almost universal. It's like 70, 80% of the people say, some people fight it, but 70 or 80% of the people are coming to that. And I said, what's causing that? So that took another year of research or so, and the answer was obvious. I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't come to it, but it's the falsely perceived emergency of the reptilian brain. So inevitably, people were skipping meals or panicking a little bit too much about weight loss and trying to lose weight too quickly, or not getting enough sleep, or not drinking enough water, or we're in a decision harried environment. What willpower is the ability to make good decisions, and there are only so many you can make every day. So the more decisions you have to make every day, including like what suits you're going to wear and who's going to take Jenny to soccer practice, that all wears down your willpower. And most people were breaking down at night saying, screw it, just do it. And so then I just came back to what they'll teach you in the programs, what any good therapist knows. Like I had this really innovative technique for interfering with people's destructive thinking, but I really had to pair that with self-care and self-regulation. You got to sleep, you got to eat regular, you got to have a little bit of social contact. You can't just isolate yourself and expect to never have the brain. We're social animals. The brain's going to trigger an emergency response if you allow yourself to be too isolated. And I don't have third-party university studies on this yet, but I think I really nailed it. I think people that really want to do this and they're willing to add the self-regulation to the fixing of their thinking, it does not have to be the bane of your existence the rest of your life. You can really extinguish the cravings.
Yeah.
Then there's the whole abstinence versus moderation argument, which I
Yeah.
imagine you want to
Yeah, we'll
talk
get into
about.
that. But
Yeah.
so why is it that people essentially relapse or slide back? So you're saying we have to tweak the executive function, basically our willpower, strengthen it by self-care.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Okay.
There's also a fundamental misunderstanding about how cravings extinction works.
One of the things that I've been thinking about is when the inner pig wins, you have the technique that you use to put it in its place. And the more it wins, neuroplasticity wins. You have what's essentially called learned helplessness. You learn that the pig can win, and then you have to battle that.
Yeah, if you look at what happens after a binge, first of all, your dopamine dysregulated, your blood sugar is dysregulated. So you're experiencing extraordinary physical cravings. You're probably feeling worse than you felt in a while. Your pig will try to take advantage of that by telling you that you're just pathetic. You can't control yourself. This is not worth it. You might as well just binge and be a happy, heavy person, or forget about ever trying to control this. You don't have the ability, right? And there are a couple of unusual insights that help you overcome that. One is to recognize that all of that negative thinking after a binge is just your pig's effort to make you feel too weak to resist the next one. And that if you write it out, if you write out the misery, the only way out is through, but if you write it out, it will resolve. You won't be miserable like that forever. When we get to the extinctions curve, I'll explain to you why people think they're going to be miserable forever, but you won't. The second thing is that our culture has misused the idea of perfectionism. We have discovered that after a binge, perfectionism is dangerous. If you allow your pig to say, if you're not perfect, then you're nothing, you obviously are pathetic and can't control yourself, that's a malignant form of perfectionism that has to go. At that point, you need to say, look, I'm human, I was doing the best I could. Even if I had 5 cupcakes and not 15, or I eat the whole pizza, but I didn't eat the box, I still did better than I could have done. And you need to focus on the tiniest little successes. So progress, not perfection, is beautiful as a mistake analysis mode. It's the only mode that works. However, when you're aiming at the target, you actually have to leverage the energy of perfectionism. You could think of an archer aiming at the bullseye. When an Olympic archer is aiming at the bullseye, and they only hit the bullseye about 40% of the time, but when they're aiming, they're not thinking, maybe I'm going to hit it or maybe I won't. They see the arrow going into the target, and they purge doubt and uncertainty from their mind. They're not saying, maybe I will, maybe I won't, because that doubt and uncertainty drains energy from your ability to focus on the goal. So you actually have to commit with perfection, but if they miss the target, what they do is they say, by how much, in what direction, what adjustments should I make? They don't say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic archer. I might as well shoot the rest of the arrows up into the air, right? Which is what we do with food. And so we come to this notion that there are two different applications or mindsets that we have to apply to recover. One as we're aiming at the goal, the other as we're correcting mistakes. The easy way to remember it is commit with perfection, but forgive yourself with dignity. Commit with perfection, but you forgive yourself with dignity. The way to do that is to turn your guilt into responsibility. And this is why it's important to have a specific rule, because if you have a very specific target, you know by how much and in what direction you missed. So therefore, you know what adjustment you need to make. So after a mistake, you say, okay, why did I have the first cupcake? What led me to have that first bite? And maybe it's because I skipped lunch, or there was nothing to eat for me when I went out to dinner with my friends. Okay, how do I fix that? I think I have to carry a handful of nuts or seeds in my car, in my purse, and throw them on my salad. Or I need to have a protein bar for when I'm in that situation. Or you have to figure out, how are you going to turn guilt into responsibility and learn everything you can from every mistake.
Yeah.
It's really interesting if you go back to the archery analogy. If you dedicate your life to archery, if you were to, you don't have to dedicate your whole life to it, but if you were to every day shoot at the target, make some mistakes, make some adjustments, you would get better just by trial and error. You don't have to have an Olympic archer teaching you. The brain is a trial and error learning machine. It doesn't happen with food because people are frightened to aim at a specific target, and because they misuse perfectionism after the binge, and they feel so badly that they feel like if they're not aiming at anything, that they're not going to feel guilty about missing it. And so they're just going to try to eat well. But that actually wears down your willpower also. So collect evidence of success. So it's not what's wrong with me, why can't I stop eating? But it's, what did I do right? What little thing did I do right? How can I do better next time? And then remember that it's progress, not perfection, after a binge, but it's commit with perfection before a binge.
So let's backtrack a bit. And can you tell us actually about your food plan and the various categories? And yeah, can you tell us about that? I would like also to know about your techniques, but first let's hear about the food plan.
So you're going to have to aim at something if you want to figure this out, right? And I like people to start with one simple rule, something you could and would do that would not be too onerous, yet would still let you know that you're going in the right direction. It might make a big difference. For example, I remember this truck driver who said, I have to eat at fast food places every single meal, 3 times a day. So I can't stop doing that, but I'll tell you what, I won't go back for seconds. Why does that work? Because he does that for a couple of weeks, he can actually do it. Like we set something that this is, I was not coaching him, someone else was, but they set something up in his life that he could manage. It was a low enough bar that he could manage it even if he woke up without his mojo. Most people get all excited about a plan they're going to make, how they're going to change everything, and they go on this really extensive diet, which would be great if they could live with it. But most people don't live with it for more than a couple of days, because one day you wake up without your mojo and you say, oh, what the hell, I just wanna. So pick a rule that you can do every day. I always put my fork down between bites. Sometimes it's, I'm not going to have sugar again. And I'll talk about how to formulate those rules in a moment. But you don't want to go all out right away, because you want to trigger your identity function. If you see yourself winning day after day, you start to say, okay, maybe this is not hopeless. Maybe I can actually do this. Maybe I can actually change. I seem to be someone who doesn't go back for seconds. I must care about myself, because there's this pervading sense of hopelessness and helplessness that develops when you are in the throes of overeating and you start to feel like someone who just hates themselves and doesn't care about themselves. So you have to overcome that. One small, simple rule. Okay, how do you formulate the rule? This is a little controversial, but it's the only thing that I found works. It's not enough to say, I'm going to try to eat healthy 90% of the time and indulge 10% of the time. It's a good idea in theory. So I could say, I'm not going to have chocolate 90% of the time. But how do you decide which is the 90% and which is the 10%?
Right.
And you know what the problem with that is that you're putting yourself through chocolate decisions all day long. Every time you're in front of chocolate, it's going to wear down your willpower. Whereas if you say, I'm only ever going to have chocolate on the weekends and no more than 2 ounces after a workout, you've made all your chocolate decisions. It's done. And I actually like people who include the words never or again in their food rules. There are all kinds of objections people have to that. I'll cover that in a second. But even a rule that I would call conditional. So I have 4 categories of rules: never, always, conditional, and unrestricted. Never is, I'm never going to have chocolate again. Yours truly came to the conclusion that eating chocolate was like hitting myself in the head with a hammer, and with the back end of the hammer also, not the blunt end.
And that
So
would be us food addicts, people who acknowledge that if I have one piece, I can't stop thinking about it.
yeah, and so for some people,
Yeah.
about 1 out of 3 people that come to me, I find none is a lot easier than some. And it could vary by substance, but usually sugar, flour, alcohol is where it comes down to. Usually 1 out of 3 people, it really needs to abstain in order to make this work, because the neurological grooves were just
Yes.
dug too deep. It was just dug too deep. And you can use all the tools I can give you. I can give you a whole bunch of tools that might help, but only 2 out of 3 people can moderate any given substance, and the third one really has to quit. So there's this category of nevers, and if you've tried 4 or 5 times with the other categories, a conditional rule might be, I will never eat pretzels outside of a Major League Baseball park, or I'll never have chocolate except for the weekends. That's a conditional rule. A lot of times people who can't moderate when they're just trying to cut down on chocolate find that they can if they're very specific about it. So if they make the decisions using the rules, then willpower is no longer required, and sometimes they can. And so a lot of my clients really don't want to give up the freedom of eating this or eating that. So I say, okay, let's try some conditional rules. We'll find out. Now that's a risk, because I've got people that are coming to me with diabetes and heart disease and cancer. And if sometimes 4 or 5 more binges could be putting you over the edge, I can't take that risk for you or decide if it's worth giving up or not. But most people want to take the risk. And so I say, okay, it's up to you. So there's the nevers, there's the conditionals. There's the always, like I always start my day with 16 ounces of pure green smoothie, or I always write a hypothetical food plan for the next day before I go to bed, or I always commit a hypothetical food plan to my sponsor before I go to bed. Those are always rules. Now, people object to the word never, because they'll say, I can't say I'm never going to have chocolate again, because what if I change my mind? What if I make a mistake? It turns out that without the words never again, we're not really drawing a very specific line around the bullseye. And so we lose the feedback. So we don't know what we've done wrong, what we've done right. We also, the rules function like a kind of tripwire that lets you know when your inner pig or your inner food monster is active. If you say, I'm never going to have chocolate again, you know that any thought, feeling, impulse, or action that suggests you're going to have chocolate between now and the day that you die is your inner pig, because you've by definition set up that alarm. Now, it turns out I'm using never in a funny way. It's the same way that you would talk to a very little child. Like when my niece, Sarah, who is graduating this weekend from college, was 3 years old, I told her, little Sarah, you can't ever cross the street without holding my hand. Never, ever. I didn't tell her, when you're a big girl, I'm going to teach you how to do that, or your mom's going to teach you how to do that. And this is just something you have to do for little girls, because it's too dangerous for her to even have the thought. That's what it's like with our pigs. Our pigs are very childlike when it comes to addictive foods and substances. And so we really have to draw a never line and present it to them like it's set in stone. You can change your food plan if you want to. You can change your food rules if you want to. The distinction is, I suggest that you do it in writing. You write down what you want to change. You write down why you want to change it. You save a backup copy of your old rule so that if you have to go back to it, you can. And then you wait 48 hours before you put the new rule into play. That usually your pig will want to change it right away on the spot. And that's an indication that it's not a safe thing to do. But if you can wait for 48 hours, new congressional legislation takes a little while to go into effect, then you're leveraging the benefit of your intellect and adult wisdom and not necessarily going with your impulses. So those are the categories of rules. People say rule is going to make me feel very rebellious. And I'll say, yes, it will. I want that. I want to separate you into your higher self and your lower self. Your rebellious nature is just part of your lower self. We all have an inner 2-year-old. You don't want to let the inner 2-year-old rule the show. Why reify that 2-year-old? Why not say rebelliousness is just a feeling, just like anxiety or depression or anger or loneliness? And what I want to do, if that's a fire, the feeling is a fire, I want to draw a fire. I want to build a fireplace around the fire so that I can feel as angry as I need to, as lonely as I need to, as anxious as I have to, without letting the fire out of the fireplace, without indulging. Rebelliousness is just another type of fire, and it's part of the game.
Been illustrating some of the techniques that you use. Would you be willing to share those mind games that you play against the inner pig?
So I've given you the primary tool of refutation, but let's just go through it more step by step. Okay. Start with one simple rule. I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again. I won't repeat the whole thing again. Now you know to listen for thoughts that suggest you have chocolate on a weekday. It's that simple. When you hear one of those thoughts, you say, and you want to read that rule out loud before breakfast every day, so it's first and foremost in your mind. Then when you hear a little voice that says, oh, come on, your parents were both fat, so you're doomed. You can't resist, right? You say, wait a minute, and it'll say, go ahead and have the chocolate. I'll say, wait a minute, that's not me, that's my pig. I never eat chocolate on a weekday again. Now, take a breath. Breathe in for a count of 7, breathe out for a count of 11. Do that a couple of times. That's an activation that activates your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part of your brain that says it's okay to rest and digest and think about things and strategize. There's no hungry tiger chasing you. This is not an emergency. Very important. Hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt comes from the reptilian brain feeling like there's an emergency. So you have to learn to calm your nervous system. Breathe in for a count of 7, out for a count of 11. The reason that works, because if there was a hungry tiger chasing you, you'd be going, right? You don't have time to breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So calm your nervous system. Then ask myself, okay, exactly what is the pig saying? You write it down. Then take another breath, because paying attention to the pig is actually excitatory for your nervous system. So you want to calm yourself down again. And then say, how was my pig wrong? What's wrong? The pig wins with a half truth and a bigger lie. So what's the half truth here? In the example I gave you, there is a genetic component to diversity, a rather strong, there is a, to obesity. I guess there's a genetic component to diversity too, but there is a genetic component to obesity. It's rather strong. However, it accounts for a little less than half the variance. Diet and lifestyle are more important. And even if I was born with a bad deck of cards, and my parents were obese, that doesn't mean that I can't live a thin life. It's just a little bit more of a mountain for me to climb. And should I just roll down the mountain because it's a little bit steep? Should I get as heavy as I can because it's a little bit steep? No, I should take the steps up the mountain that I can take little by little, right? So the half truth was that, yes, it's more difficult, but more difficult does not translate to impossible. And it does not translate to giving up and just indulging. Okay, so now I have refuted the pig. Once you have refuted the pig, you should feel a little calmer. It should be starting to feel like, okay, I think I have this urge under control. Take another breath. Then ask yourself, what would make me happier or feel like a better person if I stayed with my plan rather than feeding the pig right now? And in this case, it might be, I get to live life as a tall, thin man, and I get to be a leader in the world, and I get to have my opinions listened to, and I don't have to worry about cardiovascular concerns, or not as much, and I don't have to worry about diabetes, and I'll have energy, and I'm going to wake up feeling clear and easy and not inflamed. And you can come up with a very long list of reasons why. And then I might also say that, more importantly, I'm going to feel in control. Because you're saying a little won't hurt, but the truth is, a little is the difference between whether I'm your master or whether I'm your slave, Mr. Pig. And you can come up with bad words for that if you want, because you don't want to be the pig's BIA blank. And that will usually bring you to a greater level of certainty. Then you have to ask yourself, what needs might be unaddressed right now? Am I having the craving in the first place because I didn't eat? I got to tell you, the number one mistake people make is they don't eat. They're used to this feast and famine roller coaster. They have the diet mentality. When I'm being good, I'll be very good. When I'm being bad, I'll be awful. And so they equate being good with starving themselves. And you got to eat. If you need to lose weight, flood your body with nutrition on a regular basis at a slight caloric deficit.
Can you talk about the extinction curve?
So let's say that I have gained some weight because I'm having donuts on the way home from work. Let's say I'm up to 3 or 4 donuts and I see the Dunkin' Donuts store sign and I ate 3 or 4 donuts. And I got a little punch and it's upsetting me. So I decide to make a rule that says I will never have donuts on the way home from work again. Okay? Most people think that the first day I'm going to have the worst craving, then a little better, then a little better, then a little better. And all I have to do is stick it out until the end and the craving will be gone. That's not actually how cravings work. Craving works more like this. There's a little bit of a honeymoon period, and then bam, you have a worse craving than you've ever had in your life. And then if you stick through that, it'll start coming down. And then there'll be a couple of more little spikes towards the end.
That's where doctors say you've just made it worse. But what we usually try to tell people is you just have to sit through that.
Yep, exactly. The way to remember is that your pig will say, man, this is going to last forever. This is torture. You better give in. You got to do something. There's a reason for this burst. It's called an extinction burst. There's a biological reason for it. And if you understand it, it gives you hope is what it does. And it makes you realize you have to stake it out. Imagine that we have a caveman 100,000 years ago. And I'm going to call him Thag, Thag, because I like the name. And Thag figures out that he can follow a monkey to a banana tree. Sees the monkey, goes to the banana tree, gets a banana, nom, and it's a survival advantage. So his brain says, okay, Thag, the next time that you see a monkey, my cat is stepping under my foot. The next time that you see a monkey, I'm going to spike your dopamine so that you feel really motivated to chase the monkey to the tree. If you don't chase the monkey, I'm going to punish you by dropping your dopamine and making you miserable. So Thag learns to chase the monkey to the banana tree. Sees the monkey, gets excited, goes to the tree. This would be akin to seeing the Dunkin' Donuts store sign and getting all excited to go in. Okay, then Thag sees a monkey and goes to a tree, but for some reason, there are no bananas. Maybe it's later in the season. Maybe there's another tribe of monkeys that found it. Maybe another caveman found it. Whatever reason, there's no bananas on the tree. People would think that maybe Thag's brain would give up at that point and just stop telling him that monkeys equal bananas. But what actually happens is the opposite. It doubles or triples down and generates this huge extinction burst. Why? Because having a signal, and cravings always come in response to a signal, having a signal that leads to the acquisition of calories sometimes is better than having no signal at all. In a scarce food environment, which we probably evolved in, competitive food environment, having a monkey that could bring you to a banana tree half the time or even 20% of the time is better than no monkey at all. And so what's happening is the brain is saying, I think the reinforcer has become available on an intermittent basis, randomly intermittently, so I have to try even harder. And it's going to test that out, and then it'll test that out again as it gets to 30 or 40 exposures, 30 or 40 days. That's because the brain does not want to give up that learning. Our brains are calorie acquisition machines. Where do I find survival resources? How do I repeat those conditions? And so if you stick it out, I call this where the F or my bananas burst. If you stick that through and you don't have any donuts on the way home from work, you will eventually stop responding to the Dunkin' Donuts store sign. If you give in at the peak of the cravings, you will have made the whole situation worse because you've told your brain, you were right. See, you had to try harder.
Yeah.
And next time this happens, you better try even harder than that because we live in an environment of intermittent random reinforcement. By the way, in the behavioral literature, this is the most potent reinforcement schedule you can find. It's what happens in slot machines at casinos. That's when those little ladies are compulsively pulling on it because you got to be there, got to be there when it happens, got to be there.
Yeah.
It's also why you can sometimes eat things conditionally without giving them up if you make the context very specific in which you'll have it. So if I were to set a slot machine to only pay off on Saturdays at 10 a.m., a month later, on a Wednesday afternoon, there'd be no little old ladies at the casino or little old men at the casino, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens at the very end, thankfully, is that the brain labels the cue as dormant. It will no longer trigger the craving when I see the no longer the Dunkin' Donuts sign. Unless I get down here and I say, you know what? I'm feeling kind of cocky. I got this.
Yeah.
And then I have a random donut. Boom, I'm back again. I'm starting over again.
And that leads me to the next question, which is the debate between abstinence and moderation.
Yeah.
Do you want to elaborate on that? And do you believe in the concept of food addiction? You're talking a lot of the same concepts from a very psychological point of view, whereas food addiction acknowledges definitely the psychological, but also the fact that the food itself has a dopamine, a spike that is reinforcing. How much does the food addiction model of the external food triggering the dopamine play, or is it mainly psychological?
So this is a place where my philosophy diverges a little bit from the 12-step programs. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So absolutely, there is such a thing as food addiction. Absolutely, the power of these hundreds of billions of dollars engineering these hyperpalatable things to overcome your best interest. There are chemicals in some of the packaging that interfere with your body's ability to know when it's full, right? So how can you say that there's no such thing as overcoming your will? The place that I diverge from the 12-step programs is I don't believe in powerlessness. I think that there's a difference between having to climb a steep mountain with a very well-worn path and there being no path over the mountain except that you have no control whatsoever. I think that the world would be a better place with less processed food in it. I would have an easier job if more people would come to me ready to give up sugar, flour, and alcohol. I don't have sugar, flour, and alcohol in my life. That's actually a little bit of a lot because occasionally I'll plan out some bean pasta or something like that. And I do fine with that now. I didn't a long time ago. But there's no doctor that's going to diagnose you with a sugar, flour, and alcohol deficiency, right? There's no reason you really have to have it in your life. It's mostly just trouble. But most people want to be able to ingest a certain amount of poison and smile about it while they do. So I haven't figured out the right solution for that yet. So I absolutely believe that, look, if you're abstaining from sugar, flour, and alcohol, don't go back over the wall. Just leave it out of your life. It gets easier and easier. You become more and more present in your life. There are so many more rewards. Don't tempt fate. It's not necessary. How do you decide whether you need to give up sugar, for example? If you've tried more than a half a dozen times with various rules and you keep finding yourself with your face buried in a box of Oreos, then you probably need to give up sugar. If you are finding that as the years go by, it takes longer and longer to recover from having a box of Oreos or whatever your favorite sugar treat is, you probably need to give it up. Most people have these memories of how they could get, when I was in college, I could eat a box of Oreos and I'd be fine the next morning and I could go work out. But as you get older, you're wearing out the cells in your pancreas and it can't produce insulin in the same way. And the rest of your organs, they don't detoxify the byproducts as well. And it gets harder and harder. And your life would probably be dramatically better if you stopped eating all of the white poisons. It probably would. So, when I talk to an audience like yours, I have a very strong message that you could think of a skull and crossbones over sugar, flour, and alcohol, and your life will be so much better. It'll just be so much better. That doesn't mean you're powerless. That doesn't mean that you the 12 steps works on the foundation of powerlessness, so I don't want to take away that concept entirely, but you can control whether that first bite goes in your mouth or not. You can absolutely control that.
I think definitely that's where we see our power. But give your rationale for moderation. How can that work? And who can it work for?
That moderation works because the brain is capable of textual clues. So that's why if I set the slot machine to only go off on Saturdays, people would only go there on Saturdays. That's why for many people, my ex-business partner was like this. He had a big piece of chocolate cake every Friday night with his wife at a particular diner at a particular time of day. And that was his cake. It was not the pig's cake. And he did perfectly fine. He lost 90 pounds doing that. But his brain recognized that was the only time the reward was available. And so it only fired the cravings on that day. He also planned for it. He would get a little extra sleep the night before. He would have an extra nutritious meal that afternoon. He would make sure that he had a little extra low glycemic food the next morning.
He'd have to know that he could do that. I'm just thinking if it were a food addict, they would say, okay, Friday's my day. So I'm going to have a piece of chocolate cake, but the piece gets bigger and bigger until it's
Oh, God, yeah.
a chocolate cake.
Yeah.
So the pig gets in and manages to manipulate those rules. So how do you know who is going to abide by the rules and who won't?
You don't. You don't up front. There's a little test that I do that helps sometimes.
Okay.
So let's say you're feeling chronically ambivalent about whether to give up sugar or try to manage it conditionally. So you come up with two rules. I will never eat sugar again versus I'll only have sugar on Saturday mornings. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine that you're sitting in your living room and there's a door that appears in front of you. I'm not going to actually hypnotize you or anything now, but just do a little guided imagery. There's a door that appears in front of you that says, I will never have chocolate again. And in a moment, you walk through the door and you find yourself in an entirely different scene, may or may not have anything logically to do with what's on the door, and see what is life like in that area, what people are there, if this is part of your life, then how are you interacting? What do you look like? What does your body feel like? How are you going about your day? Paint a very vivid picture, a very creative exercise, okay? Come back, do it again for the second door. A lot of times people who are chronically ambivalent, they'll say, there's no way I'm going back through that second door again because that's just going to be death.
Yeah.
That's going to be miserable and gray. And a lot of times they'll see like a roaring spring and a waterfall and nice greenery in the first door, and the second door they see a graveyard.
Yeah.
It's not always that dramatic. On the other hand, if they're pretty much exactly the same, maybe you want to try. Maybe you want to try.
Okay. Tell us about your books, your first book and your most recent book, Defeat Your Cravings.
The first book is the most popular one, but it's nowhere near the best. The first one is the one that was me versus my pig. And it was a very angry book. And I didn't have an understanding of the science of cravings extinction. I didn't have an understanding of the screw it, just do it response. I thought that the way you fix overeating was just to take away your excuses. And it was a good treatise on how to do that. But I wrote the next book 10 years later after millions of readers and all this feedback and 2,000 clients. And so, first of all, I had a much better understanding of how to fix your thinking than I did 10 years before then, because before then it was just me and my pig in a room and my Microsoft Word doc. So I had a much better understanding of how to do that quicker. Secondly, I had a much better scientific understanding of what goes on. And I had the benefit of all those clients. So Defeat Your Cravings is the book I suggest that you start with. I wrote other books. I wrote specific books about overcoming nighttime overeating and specific binge triggers, and which are worth reading. But my real piece de resistance, the real culmination of my work is in Defeat Your Cravings. And I'd really prefer that people started there. You can get it for free at defeatyourcravings.com in electronic format, Kindle, Nook, PDF. Or you can also get it in traditional formats for a traditional price.
It sounds to me from our conversation today that it would be applicable to that 1/3 of people who identify with the skull and crossbones approach.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, those people in particular do better with the book. Yeah, because they've already at least begun to accept that that this food doesn't belong in their life.
Yeah.
And so adopting a rule is not really the hard part. The hard part is sticking with it.
will
Yeah.
it help people who are not prepared to go to that final stand?
Yeah.
And will it still be useful for them long term?
Yeah, I speak to the general population. I tend to appeal to rules-based people. There are a lot of people out there who just want to learn how to eat mindfully. And I might say, you know that there's cardboard in the food system, right? And you know that there are all these chemicals that,
Uh-huh.
like, how can you eat a bag of Oreos mindfully? How can you eat a bag of cheese puffs with all those chemicals in it that are designed to make it impossible for you to be mindful? And why is that a goal? But people want to do that, and some people can. I tell people to eat mindfully between the lines the same way that you drive mindfully between red lights, right?
Yeah,
We live in a world where you have to follow rules. So
yeah.
define your own rules. I'm not going to tell you what to eat, and learn how to keep the red lights in place so that you can feel safe with food and enjoy your meals and not have to worry about waking up buried by bags and boxes and containers.
Did you want to say anything about your program itself?
It's better if you start with the free stuff. When you go to defeatyourcravings.com and sign up for the reader bonus list, you'll get a copy of the book, but you'll also get fully recorded coaching sessions so you can see how this works in practice. Right now, there are probably a lot of people thinking, why is there this weird doctor on the line with Vera who has a pig inside of him? What's going on with that, right? It sounds harsh. And I'll tell you, you don't have to call it a pig. You can call it your food monster. And when you hear these sessions, you'll say, this really takes people from feeling desperate and hopeless and powerless to feeling hopeful and enthusiastic and excited in just one session. So I wanted you to hear that. So I recorded a bunch of that, a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of other
Yeah.
tools to build your food plan and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I recommend you start there. I have a 90-day coaching program. It includes, I do all the coaching myself now. The Ozempic and GLP-1s and AI are kind of taking over the coaching market. And I'm able to sell myself no problem, but it's harder for me to sell a whole agency anymore. I'm getting older anyway. I wanted to slow down. So I do all the coaching myself. I take about 10 people a month and includes some individual sessions. It includes groups 3 times a week, includes 10 detailed video lectures that take you through all the sticking points. It's a very powerful program. I've developed it over many years, and it's all refundable if you're not happy. So it's at defeatyourcravings.com. You'll see it.
Oh, okay, thank you. And you mentioned something about GLP-1s. Has that changed your conversation at all?
I'm glad that they're available for people who can't get it otherwise. I think that there are people who are destroying their bodies with diabetes and heart disease and all types of horrible chemicals. And if they just can't get it otherwise, I think that this is a necessity and a mitzvah. And by the way, I'm not a medical doctor. You have to make this decision with your medical doctor. That said, they wear off after a certain period of time.
Yeah.
If you go off them, most people gain weight back 4 times faster than if they went off of a diet. There are muscle wasting and nausea and other side effects to deal with. Your doctors will all tell you to manage the diet and lifestyle factors anyway. So I kind of think of them like crutches, and I'm glad crutches exist for people who have had car accidents and need to recover. But you should go to your physical therapy appointments and work on making that better the old-fashioned way.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, physiotherapy versus crutches. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is next for you?
I'm considering building my own AI for people to be able to use it. I don't feel trusting enough of it yet to unleash it on the world, but I'm considering doing that. I'm not at all tired of helping binge eaters. I'm a little exhausted from swimming upstream financially, economically. I really can't make this into the big business it once was, but was never really my first motivation anyway.
Yeah.
I probably will evolve to show people how to apply this to other addictions, gambling, pornography, not so much drugs and alcohol. I think there are people that do that better than I do. So I'll probably evolve to do that. I'm writing a weekly journal. In the program itself, we do a quote of the week and I do a big explanation and then people react to that. So having done that for years now, I know which quotes really had an influence on people, and I'm going to turn that all into a weekly journal, and that'll be out in about 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Just a quick question. When I became aware of your work quite a while ago, the word binge eater in my mind meant, oh, he treats binge eating disorder. He doesn't address food addiction, but that's not at all what you're talking about today.
I had a binge problem for sure. I was definitely a diagnosable binge eater,
Yeah,
but I never offered this as treatment. I always offered it as education and coaching
yeah,
because a lot of what I have to say is counter to what a lot of my profession might say, although it is evidence-based. What I do, if you were going to liken it to a treatment, would be cognitive behavioral therapy. And the empirical research on binge eating disorder says it responds to cognitive behavioral therapy and SSRIs. As a matter of fact, when people come on board with me, they have to sign something that says that they'll seek treatment elsewhere if they have a diagnosable disorder.
yeah,
I also think, according to the DSM-5, maybe about 4% maximum are diagnosable with a binge eating disorder, but 40% of the population is obese. So I
yeah,
tell people this is a technique to learn how to stop eating beyond your own best judgment.
yeah,
Whether you have a diagnosis or not, I don't care if you're a guy who's got 10 extra pounds on you and you want to stop having that extra piece of cake on the weekend, or if you're having 20,000 calorie binges. This is a technique that is worth knowing. It's non-invasive. There's no medication.
yeah.
So why not? Why not learn it?
Yeah, our final signature question. If you could go back and tell a younger version of yourself, maybe that 3-pound self, one thing that you know now, what would it be?
I would find myself when I was 9 years old and I would say, Glenn, step away from the Pop-Tarts. Just step away from the Pop-Tarts. That's what I would tell myself. I did more damage to myself with Pop-Tarts than anything else.
Okay.
Chocolate fudge Pop-Tarts.
All right. That was really interesting. Thank you so much for.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.